At her peak, she commanded over 1,800 ships and 80,000 sailors. She defeated the Chinese Imperial Navy, the Portuguese Empire, and the British East India Company simultaneously. She retired undefeated, negotiated her own peace terms, and died wealthy at the age of 69. Every pirate you have ever heard of, Blackbeard, Bartholomew Roberts, Calico Jack, operated at a fraction of her scale. Ching Shih was not the most powerful female pirate who ever lived. She was the most powerful pirate, full stop. Before we dive in, comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to click subscribe. She was born somewhere around 1775 in Guangdong Province on the southern coast of China. Her birth name is lost to history. The name we know her by, Ching Shih, simply means widow of Qing, which tells you something about how her story has been told and retold across 2 centuries. History gave her a husband's name and called it hers. What it could not take from her is the record of what she actually did, which stands as the most extraordinary military and commercial achievement in the history of piracy. Guangdong in the late 18th century was one of the most economically active regions in the world. The Pearl River Delta, where the cities of Guangzhou, Macau, and later Hong Kong would define an entire era of global trade, was already a nexus of commerce, smuggling, and maritime power. The fishing villages and river communities of the Delta existed in a complex relationship with the sea, dependent on it for livelihood and increasingly subject to the depredations of the pirate networks that operated throughout the South China Sea. The young woman who would become Ching Shih worked, according to the most reliable historical accounts, as a sex worker aboard a floating brothel in Canton Harbor. This is where she first encountered Zheng Yi, the man she would marry, and whose fleet she would eventually inherit and expand beyond anything he had imagined. The historical record is clear that the marriage was not simply a transaction. Ching Shih negotiated the terms herself. Zheng Yi was already a significant pirate commander when he encountered the woman who would become his wife. The Zheng family had deep roots in Chinese piracy. His ancestors had been pirates and sea traders for generations, a part of a tradition in which the line between legitimate maritime commerce and piracy was a matter of political negotiation rather than moral principle. By the early 1800s, Zheng Yi commanded a confederation of pirate fleets that operated throughout the South China Sea, extracting tribute from coastal villages, taxing merchant shipping, and engaging in a sophisticated economy that included protection rackets, salt smuggling, and direct trade in goods that moved through channels the Qing imperial authorities could not easily monitor or control. When Zheng Yi proposed marriage to the woman who would become Ching Shih, she did not simply accept. According to accounts that have survived in Chinese historical records and in the memoirs of European traders who dealt with the Confederation in the years that followed, she negotiated specific terms before agreeing. She would marry him if she received an equal share in his fleet and a co-equal role in military decisions. Zheng Yi agreed. The marriage took place around 1801. This negotiation is the foundation of everything that follows. In an era when women in Imperial China had essentially no legal existence independent of their male relatives, a sex worker in Canton Harbor secured contractual co-ownership of one of the largest pirate fleets in the world. She was approximately 26 years old. The 6 years of the Zheng Yi and Ching Shih partnership transformed the pirate confederation from a significant regional force into something approaching a maritime state. Zheng Yi was an effective military commander with strong family connections throughout the pirate networks of the South China Sea. So his wife was something more. She had an instinct for organization, for the political management of competing interests, and for the economic structures that would make a large, diverse coalition of pirates function as a coherent unit rather than a collection of competing gangs. Together, they expanded the Red Flag Fleet, as Zheng Yi's confederation was called, to a size that had no precedent in Chinese piracy. They brought previously independent commanders into the confederation through a combination of military pressure, strategic marriage alliances, and economic arrangements that gave smaller fleet commanders a stake in the success of the larger organization. By 1807, when Ching Shih died in a typhoon near Vietnam at approximately the age of 42, the Confederation numbered several hundred ships and tens of thousands of sailors. The death of the husband is the moment where most stories of this era would end. The widow would be absorbed into someone else's household, her authority dissolved, her role reduced to mourning and compliance. This is not what happened. Ching Shih moved within weeks of her husband's death to consolidate her position at the head of the Red Flag Fleet. She did two things simultaneously that demonstrated the political intelligence that would define her career. First, she secured the loyalty of Zhang Bao, the young man who had been Ching Shih's most trusted military commander and adopted son. Zhang Bao was extraordinarily effective as a naval tactician and had the respect of the fleet's fighting men. She made him her chief commander, and she made him her partner in a relationship that would eventually become a second marriage. Second, she established a formal code of laws governing the Confederation's operations, a document that codified what had previously been informal arrangements and gave the organization a legal structure that could function independently of any individual's personal authority. The code of laws that Ching Shih established is one of the most remarkable documents in the history of piracy. It governed everything from the distribution of plunder to the treatment of captives, from the punishment of cowardice in battle to the rights of wives of Confederation members. It was a genuine legal system, not a set of vague principles, and it was enforced with consistency and sometimes with ferocity. The code required that all plunder be reported to a central register before any individual distribution took place. A portion went to the common fund of the Confederation. The remainder was distributed according to a formula that reflected the contribution of each ship and each sailor. Theft from the common register was punishable by death. Individual ships were not permitted to pillage or attack independently of Confederation orders. A sailor who attacked or raped a female captive faced execution. A sailor who conducted consensual relations with a female captive was required to marry her or face execution. Women captured in raids were to be ransomed, sold or released according to a schedule of values, but were not to be harmed. These rules were not humanitarian impulses, they were organizational logic. An organization of 80,000 people, in which every member was doing whatever they individually chose, would not be an organization at all. It would be a mob. Ching Shih understood that the source of her power was the coherence of the Confederation, and that coherence required rules that were applied consistently regardless of who violated them. The operational territory of the Red Flag Fleet under Ching Shih's leadership encompassed most of the South China Sea, with particular concentration in the Pearl River Delta and the coastal waters of Guangdong Province. The Confederation did not simply raid and retreat. It established a permanent economic presence across its territory that functioned more like a tax authority than a criminal enterprise. Coastal villages throughout the region paid regular tribute to the Confederation in exchange for protection. Merchant ships operating in the South China Sea purchased passes from Confederation representatives that entitled them to transit the Confederation's waters without harassment. Ships that refused to purchase passes were attacked, their cargo seized, their crews sometimes ransomed. Ships that purchased passes and were then attacked by Confederation members faced the Confederation's own internal justice system, which would punish the offending commander. The pass system worked because it was reliable. Merchants learned that a Confederation pass was genuine protection, not merely a payment made to avoid an attack that would happen anyway. This economic structure generated revenues that were independent of any individual raid or military operation. The Confederation had, in effect, created a taxation system over a significant portion of South China Sea commerce. Ching Shih understood that this was more valuable than any amount of plunder from individual raids because it was reliable, predictable, and did not require constant military operations to maintain. The threat had to be credible. The actual exercise of that threat was, whenever possible, secondary to the revenue it generated by being available. The Qing Imperial government's response to the growth of the Red Flag Fleet was initially inadequate and eventually desperate. The South China Sea had never been the Qing Dynasty's primary military concern. The empire faced threats from the north and the west that consumed the attention and resources of the military establishment. The provincial authorities of Guangdong were responsible for managing the pirate problem, and they consistently underestimated both the size of the Confederation and the sophistication of its organization. The first major imperial attempt to suppress the Red Flag Fleet came in 1808, when the Guangdong provincial authorities assembled a fleet and moved against the Confederation. The encounter was not a battle, it was an embarrassment. The imperial fleet, outmaneuvered and outfought, was defeated comprehensively. Several imperial commanders were captured. Their ships were seized and incorporated into the Confederation. The defeat strengthened the Confederation's position by demonstrating that the Imperial Navy could not defeat it in open water and by providing additional ships, weapons, and supplies. The provincial authorities appealed to the central government for additional resources and received a larger fleet. The second major engagement went similarly to the first. The Imperial forces were defeated. More ships were added to the Confederation's holdings. The pattern was becoming embarrassing for the dynasty, and the embarrassment was beginning to attract attention from European powers who had their own commercial interests in South China Sea shipping. Portugal had established a colonial presence at Macau on the Pearl River Delta since 1557. By the early 19th century, Macau was a significant trading port with commercial interests throughout the South China Sea. The Ching Shih Confederation's domination of those waters affected Portuguese trade routes and Portuguese merchant vessels. The Portuguese colonial authorities decided that the Confederation was a problem that required a military solution. The Portuguese dispatched a fleet from Macau in 1809. The result was the same as the imperial engagements had produced. The Portuguese fleet was defeated. Some ships were captured. The Confederation's reputation was enhanced further by demonstrating that it could defeat a European naval force as readily as it defeated the Imperial Navy. The British East India Company, which was the dominant commercial force in the wider region and had interests in trade routes that connected India, China, and Southeast Asia, was watching these developments with increasing concern. The company dispatched ships to assist the Qing authorities, adding a third naval power to the coalition being assembled against the Confederation. This coalition force was, on paper, formidable. In practice, it faced the same problems that every previous naval force attempting to confront Ching Shih had encountered. The South China Sea was the Confederation's home territory. The sailors of the Red Flag Fleet had spent their lives in those waters. They knew every shoal, every channel, every seasonal wind pattern. They were fighting in waters where their local knowledge gave them advantages that no amount of superior firepower could entirely compensate for. The combined Qing, Portuguese, and British force engaged the Confederation and was unable to achieve a decisive victory. The Confederation withdrew when pressed, dispersed into the Delta's thousands of waterways, and reassembled when the attacking force withdrew. The military stalemate of 1809 and early 1810 produced a political situation that was genuinely novel in Chinese imperial history. The Qing government, having failed to suppress the Confederation by force, began to consider whether negotiation was more practical than continued military engagement. This was not an easy position for an imperial government to take. Negotiating with pirates acknowledged their legitimacy as a political entity, which the Confucian framework of imperial governance was poorly equipped to do. Criminals were to be suppressed and punished, not negotiated with as equals. The provincial governor of Guangdong, Zhang Beiling, was a practical man facing a practical problem. The Confederation was not going to be defeated militarily with the resources available to him. The military engagements were not weakening the Confederation. They were, if anything, strengthening it by providing additional ships and demonstrating its effectiveness. Meanwhile, South China Sea commerce was being disrupted in ways that were damaging the provincial economy and generating pressure from the merchant class. Something had to change. Ching Shih was not unaware of the strategic situation. The Confederation was large, wealthy, and militarily undefeated, but it faced structural pressures that pure military power could not resolve. Maintaining a force of 80,000 people required continuous revenue. The pass system and the tribute network were effective, but they required constant enforcement. The Confederation could not simply exist forever as a perpetual war footing. There was also the question of succession and stability. The code of laws she had established gave the Confederation a legal structure, but that structure existed outside any recognized authority. There was no mechanism for resolving disputes except internal Confederation justice, which was reliable as long as the Confederation's leadership was strong and clear. The negotiation that followed was conducted on terms that reflected the actual balance of power, which favored the Confederation. Ching Shih's negotiators met with provincial authorities in 1810, and the resulting agreement was remarkable. The Confederation members who chose to accept imperial amnesty would receive it, keep the ships they commanded, keep the wealth they had accumulated, and be offered positions in the imperial military structure that reflected their actual rank and capability. Those who chose not to accept the amnesty were free to continue operating, with the understanding that the imperial authorities would continue to oppose them with whatever resources they could muster. Zhang Bao, Ching Shih's commander and partner, negotiated his own position within this framework. He accepted the amnesty and was absorbed into the Qing military at a rank commensurate with his actual naval command experience. He continued to operate effectively as a military commander under imperial authority until his death a few years after the settlement. The transition from pirate admiral to imperial military officer was, in practical terms, less disruptive than it sounds. The skills were the same, the territory was the same, the men were the same. Only the formal authority under which he operated had changed. Ching Shih herself negotiated terms that were entirely on her own behalf and reflected her priorities. She retired from active command. She kept her wealth. She married Zhang Bao officially under the new arrangements. She eventually operated a gambling house in Canton, a business that was technically illegal, but that operated with the kind of informal tolerance from authorities that suggested her former power still cast a long shadow over her relationships with the people who had negotiated with her. The negotiated settlement of 1810 is not a defeat. It is easy to misread it as such because it ended the Confederation's formal existence as an independent military force. But Ching Shih chose the moment and the terms. She negotiated from a position of undefeated military strength, accepted an arrangement that preserved her personal wealth and safety, and exited a position that was structurally unsustainable on her own schedule. A pirate confederation of 80,000 people could not have continued indefinitely. The question was always how it would end, not whether. She ensured that it ended on the best possible terms for herself and for the thousands of people who had operated under her code. The comparison with the pirates who have achieved greater fame in Western history is not flattering to those pirates. Blackbeard, whose real name was Edward Teach, operated for approximately 2 years as a major pirate and commanded at his peak perhaps 4 ships and 400 men. His career ended with his death in battle. Bartholomew Roberts, who is often cited as the most successful pirate in terms of ships captured, he operated for approximately 3 years and was killed in an engagement with the Royal Navy. Henry Every, whose capture of the Mughal treasure ship Ganges Sawai in 1695 was one of the most profitable single acts of piracy in history, commanded 1 ship and spent the remainder of his life in hiding. Ching Shih commanded 1,800 ships. She commanded 80,000 people. She operated for approximately 6 years at the height of her power. She was never defeated in battle by any naval force that came against her. She retired on her own terms and lived for decades after the settlement of 1810, dying in 1844 at approximately the age of 69. The disproportion between her actual achievement and her prominence in Western historical and popular culture is explained entirely by the Western focus of the piracy narratives that have dominated the genre. The golden age of piracy, the Caribbean buccaneers, the British and American maritime traditions that produced Blackbeard and his contemporaries are the piracy that Western historians wrote about because it was the piracy they were culturally connected to. The South China Sea, the Qing Dynasty, and the internal dynamics of the Chinese coastal economy were not topics that European and American historians prioritized. The result is a massive distortion in the historical record that places mediocre European pirates at the center of piracy history and consigns the most successful pirate in history to a footnote. The code of laws she established is the foundation of everything the Confederation achieved. Organizations of 80,000 people do not hold together through charisma alone. They require structures that distribute resources fairly, punish defection consistently, and create shared interest in the organization's success. The Red Flag Fleet's code addressed all of these requirements. The central register system meant every member received a fair share relative to their contribution. Commanders who stole from the register were punished regardless of rank. This consistency was the source of trust, and trust was the source of cohesion. The rules governing captives and raids had additional economic logic. Random violence against villages and merchants was prohibited because it was economically destructive. On villages ransacked without reason would warn neighboring communities. Merchants robbed despite holding valid passes would stop purchasing passes. The pass system depended on the Confederation's reliability, which depended on consistent enforcement. Leaders who exempt themselves from the rules they impose on others create organizations that eventually destroy themselves through corruption. Ching Shih understood this. The authority of the code derived from its universal application. Its universal application derived from her willingness to enforce it even when enforcement was personally costly. European traders who dealt with the Confederation in its peak years documented a story that appears in multiple independent sources. Commander in the Confederation attacked a village that had purchased a pass and was therefore under Confederation protection. The village reported the attack. Ching Shih heard the case. The commander was found to have violated the protection agreement. He was executed. The execution cost her one commander. It purchased the credibility of the pass system for every merchant and village in the Confederation's territory. The economic value of that credibility, measured in pass revenues and tribute payments over the years that followed, was many multiples of the cost of losing one commander. She was not a romantic figure in the tradition of pirate mythology. She was an extraordinarily capable organizational leader who understood that power derived from structure. Structure required enforcement, and enforcement required consistency. The romance of piracy was the mythology surrounding her operation. The reality was closer to running a large, complex, and highly successful business in extremely difficult conditions. She died in 1844, approximately 69 years old, wealthy, in her own home, surrounded by family. This is not how pirates die in the stories. Pirates die in battle, or in flight, or on the gallows. The actual most powerful pirate who ever lived died in bed at a ripe old age, having outlasted every enemy and every crisis that her career produced. And that is the story of Ching Shih. From a floating brothel in Canton Harbor to the command of 80,000 sailors and 1,800 ships, from defeating the Chinese Empire, Portugal, and Britain in the same campaign, to retiring undefeated and dying wealthy at 69. No pirate came close. No pirate even tried at this scale. The sea was hers, and she gave it up when she chose to. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.